On this week's video, we're visiting the interconnected film universe that is not the Marvel Universe. We're actually talking about the Conjuring films. That's right, the interconnected series. We're going to check to see if it actually has its own continuity that works as well as the Marvel movies do. And I have a slight confession to make, although this is probably going to upset some fans out there, but I don't actually really like these movies. My reasoning will come out during the video, and again, not that I don't think that they're well-made movies, just not crazy about them, so I might be a little bit harsher than I normally am. But in the meantime, let's check out the continuity. Our story begins in 2013 with The Conjuring. The film opens with the Annabelle doll in 1968, and then we meet the Warrens, who are paranormal investigators. And the scroll tells us that they're renowned experts and definitely not scam artists taking advantage of people's fears of the supernatural. Oh no, not at all. We then jump to 1971, and the Perron family moves into a new house. Because as I discussed in the Insidious and Sinister timelines in modern horror, moving is the greatest terror of all. Their dog gets killed, mom gets bruises, there is some spooky town in the girl's bedroom, a ghost claps. That's spooky, spooky clapping. Something's on top of the dresser, so they call in Night Owl and Mother, and they bring in their team as we shift from Amityville to Poltergeist, and eventually we get to full-on ghost hair dragging. Annabelle makes a return appearance until we finally shift gears and it turns into The Exorcist for a final battle with the spirit possessing Office Space Guy's wife, even though this isn't her first haunting. They expel the spooky ghost, and the Warrens get called to Long Island to some house in Amityville, and even the mention of the name Amityville makes me want to find the nearest bottle. And the movie ends with photos of the real-life people to convince you that this is a totally true story that the Warrens didn't make up at all. The Conjuring was such a huge hit that only 1 year later, in 2014, it got a spin-off film in Annabelle, based on the doll. It shows us her introduction from the previous film and then tells us that it's Santa Monica 1 year earlier, placing us in 1967. John here gives his expectant wife a creepy-looking doll, like creepy enough to look at your husband and say, "Why did you get me this weird-looking doll?" Home invaders attack, stabbing Mia before being shot, and the female attacker kills herself while holding the doll. I'm assuming that they cut the scene with her holding the doll and chanting, "Ade Due Dambala!" Newspapers of the event show a date as October 1970, which is a real problem since that places this film 2 years after the events of The Conjuring's opening. It does place it 1 year before the events of The Conjuring, so that's maybe what the title screen was talking about. Anyway, weird stuff starts happening and John tosses the doll and they have their baby, and Annabelle makes her way back. More spooky happens. Maria Dillard shows up. The kid gets big quick. I mean, she's at least 7 or 8 months here, so that would put us in 1971. I mean, Mia was pregnant in October 1970, so the baby would have to be born in the tail end of 70, so this is definitely 71 now. The doll attacks a priest, and the ghost attacks Mia, but Evelyn sacrifices her own soul to save the baby, and it cuts to 6 months later, so we're looking at mid to late 71, and we see a woman buy Annabelle to give to her daughter, the girl from the intro to The Conjuring, so the timeline is totally off, because according to that movie, the doll's in a glass case by then. So the only thing that makes sense is chalking the newspaper up to an error, and the film does actually take place in 1967, which would follow the timeline that was already set up in The Conjuring. 2 years later, we head back to the Warren territory with The Conjuring 2 in 2016. It starts off in Amityville in 76, and Lorraine experiences the DeFeo murders. A spooky nun shows up, and we head to London, where it's 1977. A down-on-their-luck British family finds a Ouija board. The Warrens go on TV, and this guy says that Amityville was a hoax, and says the Warrens were just using the fake haunting for their own publicity, and he's treated as the bad guy here instead of, the guy telling the truth in real life. I mean, I know in the movies he's wrong, but this is supposed to be a true story, and the Lutzes absolutely made up Amityville. So, he's right. Spooky but kind of questionable stuff happens that mostly only the little girl sees, and then I know some people really praise the whole demon's name is in the background, but this is about as subtle as a kick to the teeth. Demon Nun appears, and sit, Lola, sit. The crooked man accidentally walks in from a Tim Burton movie. Ed says at this point that it's December 21st, and then he sings. For like a really long time. It's kind of weird. And there's some stuff that makes it very overt that if you weren't sure up until this point that these are Christian films, well, these are Christian films. Franca gets proof that the little girl faked the hauntings, but that's all the demon's ruse, and here's where I get on my soapbox. In the real-life case, the little girl was caught faking the incidents, but the Warrens had already said that they felt ghostly presences there and looked foolish, and are now basically rewriting history to show that they were right all along, but the truth is that they're scam artists. No better than any of those TV psychics, and these movies paint them out to be some sort of heroes that were mocked, but they were on the side of good the whole time, instead of being publicity-chasing hucksters. Which they were. Anyway, they go back to the house to fight the demon, and they're able to do it because Lorraine asked the demon his name, and it not only told her, but it also put it all over her house. She uses the name to defeat the nun and save Ed, and ends with them adding the Crooked Man's box in the collection. We then bounce back in time with 2017's Annabelle creation, and starts with the title doll being created, and then we meet Anthony LaPaglia and Eowyn, and their daughter is run over. It cuts to 12 years later, and they take in a group of girl orphans, but Esther now has some mysterious illness and spooky ghost stuff starts happening. Annabelle shows up and moves. Valak shows up in a photo, and things get demony pretty quickly. Mrs. Deagles' chair comes into play, and Bee pukes in Janice's mouth. So she turns all shadowy and kills Mr. Mullins. Turns out they were tricked by a demon pretending to be their daughter, and it took Mrs. Mullins' eye out in the past and then straight up kills her in the present. There's a creepy scarecrow who will probably get his own movie now, and they trap evil Janice and Annabelle in the closet, but when the police arrive, she's escaped, and they take the doll away. Janice ends up in another orphanage, calling herself Annabelle now, and it jumps to 12 years later, and she's with her new family, and they're Mia and John's neighbors from the first one, and she kills them, setting up the events of the previous film. Since our timeline shows that scene occurring in 1967, not 1970 like that damn newspaper, that makes the bulk of this film happen 12 years earlier in 1955, and the prologue occurring in 1943. And coming out right about now is The Nun, which is the next chapter in the Conjuring saga, featuring the villain from The Conjuring 2, most likely a prequel. You can also look forward to films about the Crooked Man, and Annabelle 3, which has been announced for next year. The filmmakers have also released their own official timeline, which claims that Annabelle takes place in 1970, much like the newspaper says. Unfortunately, this date does not make sense with their own movies and with the beginning of The Conjuring, and also with their own timeline, because they say the Annabelle creation takes place in 1955. Well, Annabelle creation actually says that the beginning of Annabelle takes place 12 years later, so that's 1967. And Mia's pregnant. So if that's true and the rest of the movie takes place in 1970, then the baby should be 3, and this baby ain't 3. Also, in case you were wondering, it looks like The Nun will take place in 1952, about 3 years before the events of Annabelle creation. So there you have it, 4 movies that tie together pretty well, with the exception of that one newspaper in the first Annabelle movie. So the newspaper, like I said before, I don't really care for most of these. I did like the second Annabelle movie quite a bit. A lot of atmosphere in that was great. But the Conjuring movies and the first Annabelle movie, I don't care for. I feel like they're pretty well made movies. I just have a real problem with the content. I'm not a fan of the Warrens. I do feel as if they are scam artists and hucksters taking advantage of people. So films that portray them as like these righteous good guys, I just have a problem with. So I don't support the content. But if you like them, it's totally cool. They are, like I said, they're well-made movies. It's up to you. That's about it for this week's video. I hope you liked it. You know what to do with the buttons. What do they say? Smash the like button. You don't have to smash it. Gently caress it. It's totally okay with that. Subscribe, of course, and then also check out my Patreon page. I want to thank these guys over here. They are my patrons, so they help this channel continue on. So I want to thank all of those guys. Also, a special shout out to my regular commenters. I've got a lot of people out there that comment on every video, and I thank you to you guys. It really means a lot to see the comments come in every single time, and you are appreciated. And until then, I'll see you in another couple weeks for another great video. Bye, guys.